Just a heads up, everyone, we're gonna wait until like 35, just so everybody like gets a chance to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Um, my name is Kirat. I am a student at the University of Minnesota, and I'm involved with the Indian Student Association. Um, I'm the Cultural and Advocacy Chair this year, and ISA is collaborating with a local nonprofit called Seva AFW. The nonprofit focuses on Asian Indian family wellness. Um, and I'm just going to take a second to introduce the Indian Student Association, and then you'll get a chance to meet my wonderful co-host, Gitanjali. So, the Indian Student Association operates as a nonprofit, non-political, non-religious organization with an intent to preserve and promote the Indian culture at the University of Minnesota to South Asian and non-South Asians alike. Um, some initiatives we are focusing on this year are Humans of ISA, which is a platform for students to share their stories with the South Asian students across the U. And also, we started a new initiative this year called Dismantling the Narrative, and that focuses more on social justice issues. Um, Indian Perspectives, which is what you're all at. It's basically a chance for students to have discussions like this. And this is a little bit different in the sense that it's open to all ages. So we're going to be talking more about open communication among generations, multiple generations. And then throughout the semester, we will be hosting online events, obviously because of COVID. And so just stay tuned on our social media and the website, which is isaumn.org, to continue to attend these events. I'm going to hand it over to Gitanjali, and she's going to introduce herself and Seva.
Hello, everyone. This is Gitanjali Mittal, and I work as a program developer with SEVA AIFW. SEVA AIFW, it stands for Asian Indian Family Wellness. It was formed in 2004, and it's a nonprofit organization, just as Kirat has mentioned. We are serving the South Asian community, and we're committed to serving, supporting, and enhancing family wellness for the South Asian community, especially the vulnerable and underserved in the Twin Cities and around Minnesota. And we envision a South Asian community that is healthy and violence free, with self determined women, engaged and supported elders and families. And we also serve people creating programs as the need arise, being responsive to the community by providing culturally responsive services. We collaborate with more than 35 organizations to reach out to the South Asian community for their specific needs with an aim to spread awareness about practicing inclusivity, racial justice, and promoting gender equity throughout our more than a dozen programs that include people of all ages, genders, and social strata in a uh, culturally sensitive manner. With the pandemic, we saw the rising need for mental health services that were culturally specific. Uh, so SEVA AIFW started the Talk It Out sessions to provide free and confidential mental health consultations to the members of the community. And these consultations are still going on, and I'll emphasize they're free and confidential. We thank ISA for this very important discussion around the intergenerational gap in mental health. And if you want to know more about SEVA, you can visit our website at seva-aifw.org. Thank you, Kirat, and I'll hand it over to you again.
You're mute.
Yep, got it. Today we are being joined by two wonderful guests. One of them being a community leader and one of them being a licensed professional. So I'm just going to take a second to introduce Janani, and she is a writer, a content creator, and a mental health advocate. Her objective is to encourage the conversation on mental health and allow people to feel comfortable and vulnerable within themselves. She believes that we can all achieve great things once we conquer and understand our mind, body, and soul. So she's going to be talking a little bit about her personal experiences and her mental health journey today. Um, so quickly before we get started, just a trigger warning, we're going to be talking about mental health and sensitive topics such as depression, anxiety. If you feel that you need to leave, go ahead and do so. And if you would like to reach out to any of us to talk about resources and things that we went over, we can provide you that information after the session is over as well. So I'm going to kind of hand it over to Janani if you want to give like a brief introduction, and then I will ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirat. As she mentioned, my name is Janani, and I started talking about mental health a lot on social media back in May. Similarly to how Gitanjali mentioned, I did notice that there was a situation with the pandemic, and I thought for me personally, after going through college and understanding a little bit more about myself, that it was time to share my story. So I went and I discussed a lot of our issues that we face in our community, but also how do we independently understand our mental health, and how do we understand that this is an actual issue that we need to address daily. This is not something that just happens on Mental Health Awareness Week or Mental Health Awareness Day. It is a constant and ongoing healing process. And for that, I will continuously post on social media just to help my audience kind of gain that perspective.
So you talked a little bit about mental health. Could you delve deeper into what mental health means to you and what that has looked like as you've grown up?
Yeah, of course. So this is again where that trigger warning is very helpful. I was diagnosed with depression when I was 12 years old. So from then, for the last, I guess, 10 years, it's been a roller coaster ride of trying to figure out what works for me and what doesn't. And I think what the thing about healing and the thing about depression is that not every day is the same. We go through so many issues every single day, even from in the future. So how can we expect ourselves to have those same tactics every single day? With that, and obviously with the Indian community and the gossip culture within that, and then me having to explain this to my parents as a 14-year-old, it was all messed up in my head as to what I should do. My parents, of course, they did their best to understand, and we'll get into that a little bit later as to how to address this with our parents. But I think for me, my journey encompasses a lot of understanding that it comes from introspection. I needed to know what I needed in order to figure out, my certain toolbox on what are the things that I need to do daily in order to stay afloat, in order to stay productive, and hopefully inspire others to do the same. If I've taken on this role, then I also have to make sure that I'm okay first, because how can I, provide details into how you should fix yourself if I'm not even myself okay? So one thing that I always like to say on all my social media platforms is it's hard to advise. I think that everyone is so different, and for me to come up here and say like, oh, go for a walk when you're feeling upset, that really diminishes a lot of these issues. And sometimes it's important to recognize when you need professional help and when you merely need time alone. I would argue a therapist is someone that you should have in your life at all times, but that's something that worked for me. So I definitely think that with my mental health journey, I've learned a lot about how to create my own toolbox and how to inspire others to do the same.
Thank you so much. So you had briefly mentioned that you had to have this conversation with your parents about mental health and about depression at a really young age. Could you talk a little bit about how that conversation went, what it looked like, how you felt while you were having it? Yes, just some details about that would be great.
So like anything, nothing is going to happen overnight, right? And I think at a young age, I expected my parents to automatically know exactly what I was saying. Kind of because when you're kids, you don't really look at your parents as people. You kind of just think of them as people who know everything. So they should understand your mind. And the thing is, like any other relationship, active communication is very important. So I believe that starting that conversation early, even if it is a rocky road, could be very helpful. I believe that core issue is that we sit in our rooms, assuming that they don't understand anything about us, and they're sitting downstairs in the living room angry that we're not interacting with them. And I think that there's so much disconnect with both cultures. And if we sit and patiently explain what it feels like I'm having an anxiety attack and this is my thought process, I don't know how to convey that to you in the moment. But after I step back, I can say, okay, I call my parents, Amanapa, this is how I'm feeling right now. I need help. I need you to just be there for me, if anything. And so I personally experience a lot of loneliness, and I don't really understand the concept between alone versus lonely. And so that's something that I still struggle with today. So explaining that to my parents really helped me. Unfortunately, it does take time and effort, and it took me 4 years for them to understand that I needed a therapist. And my mom is literally a doctor. So even in that, it was hard for her to comprehend that her own daughter needed help. So I totally understand that our parents are out of touch with this, but we need to remind them that they probably went through all of these things too. And we get reminded every day that they came from India to America with no shoes and money, and they must have felt lonely too. So kind of bringing that back and just saying, okay, they must have been upset, they must have been depressed in some capacity. And if they can't understand our mental health struggles, perhaps they have still yet to process their own. So I think that patience is key.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so much for sharing. So, you are a content creator. You share your story on social media. Can you tell me a little bit about that journey and how you kind of became comfortable putting your story out there and willing to share it with the world?
Of course. So like I mentioned, I started in the pandemic. It was probably May when I started talking about all of this. And I knew that I wanted to have some sort of presence on social media, but nothing was sticking. I couldn't talk about fashion, beauty, or anything like that. Nothing was totally me. So what I ended up doing was talking about my experiences, and it comes into this nice little wrapped up bow of mental health. But in reality, it's all struggles that we all go through. And it's something that I decided that I would be ready for, because I truly believe that introspection and being vulnerable within ourselves is the way to understand the world even. I think that if we can sit down and be comfortable in our own thoughts without having an anxiety attack, like, you're already doing so well. And it's those tiny little rewards that I wanted to give others, because I wish I had someone to sit there and tell me, like, it's okay that you didn't get out of bed today. Just, do you want to get out of bed tomorrow? And if my answer is yes, then I'm already, progressing into a higher level of understanding myself. And it's about understanding, it's about compassion, it's about kindness, and just being there for other people. And I had a really tough time in college, and I never really had like a group of people that I felt connected to. And it broke my heart to think that someone else could be going through that right now. And I didn't want anyone to have the college experience that I had. So I think with social media, it's really helpful to gain, perspective into a lot of different audiences. And I get DMs almost every single day saying, like, how do I tackle this? How do I tackle that? And my answer is always, okay, like, what's the outcome? Like, what do you want out of this situation? And for me, sometimes my answer was, I don't want to be happy. Like, I want to be sad forever, because it feels better than to have to work to be happier. And I think the way that I try to talk about mental health is just understanding that that's probably the mental space that a lot of people are in, and not pushing for, you should always have a great day, or everything happens for a reason. Like, all of these toxic positivity quotes really drove me crazy. And I just wanted to help put a stop to that.
Yeah. So as you've like been sharing more and more of your journey on social media, could you describe like a little bit of the climate, specifically within the South Asian community, and kind of the reactions from both maybe your parents and their friends and people that, you've looked up to, as well as like um, younger adults and youth reactions that you've been getting?
So every community has its fair share of issues. I think one of ours is that we allow mental health to stay taboo, and we love gossiping. I think that that's something that in the Indian community, there's a lot of jealousy, a lot of competition, and each community has its own flaws, but I found this to be really prevalent in mine. And toxic masculinity and misogyny still prevails, and that affects our mental health at a core level. I mean, as we can see by this year and the pandemic, our external is very much driven into how we live our lives every single day. And I felt that if if we're secure to be introspective, maybe then we can validate and understand each other's mental perspective. And as an Indian American, I definitely feel pressure when it comes to dealing with my mental health. Like, I choose to continuously talk about it before and after all of these mental health awareness days. And I get asked all the time, like, so why do you post so much on social media? Or, like, what are you trying to really achieve here? And sometimes I'm at a loss for words, especially when my parents are asking me that question. I don't know how to always justify that I'm trying to do this so that people feel less alone. And, I'm not trying to cure or advise. I just want people to feel validated. And so our community can be very mean about this. And I've received a lot of hate as much as love. I think it does come in both ways about this, because a lot of people don't really like the fact that I'm talking so blatantly. If you kind of see the tone of my posts, none of it's really like sugar coated, and it's because I just don't feel like mental health should be. And so I can't say that it's been received always well, but I do appreciate like opportunities like these, where a lot of people can kind of understand my perspective and why I do things. So that maybe they can talk about their experiences one day too.
Yeah. Last question. What advice do you have for like South Asian students that are transitioning from childhood to adulthood, like college age and beyond, and becoming more aware, familiar with their mental health?
Know who your friends are. I think it's very important to, especially when you're a freshman or a sophomore going into college, these are pivotal years of your life of development. And in my freshman and sophomore year of college 2 years ago, I was not at the place mentally to be doing what I was doing. And I think that it's really important for me, it was really important for me to know who my friends were, so that if I were ever in a situation where I needed mental health help, I would have that, extra support and guidance, feeling like, okay, my problems are valid. Like, I was told pretty much my entire college experience that whatever I was feeling, like I was pretty much gaslighted a lot. And I think that that happens a lot in our community. It's not just me, like I'm no victim. I think a lot of us are. And I think with college, it's a very tough time. Like you're going out for the first time. I mean, unfortunately not this year, but you're going out for the first time on your own. You're expected to be an adult. You're expected to study. You're expected to make friends, but also have a social life, but also balance everything. It's a lot. And I think it's important to know who your friends are. Make sure you put your mental health and your understanding of yourself first before any guy, before any girl. And you can allow yourself to be and become someone before you engage in other activities, for sure.
Thank you so much, Janani, for sharing your personal stories and being vulnerable with us. We all really appreciate everything you had to say.
Thank you.
Gitanjali, I'm going to hand it off to you, and we will be hearing from Nikhil very soon.
Thank you, Kirat, and thank you, Janani. It was really very interesting talk because there are different perspectives that we keep on hearing. I have been working with the youth and I have heard a lot from them, and I work with parents as well, and I also hear their perspective. You have very, in a balanced way, presented it. Thank you so much for that. So I would be introducing Nikhil. Nikhil Kaistha is a clinical psychotherapist with a private practice in downtown Minneapolis. His work centers around healing that is informed by the latest knowledge in the field of psychotherapy, the individual's identity, culture, and spirituality. Nikhil serves on the board of Reclaim and has provided culturally relevant mental health consultation to other agencies and nonprofits. He is an adjunct faculty at Adler Graduate School, and his experience includes supervision, uh, holistic health modalities, trauma, LGBTQIAA plus health, and multicultural counseling. Thank you so much, Nikhil, for joining us today here for this very informative and important talk that we need to have within our community. And I'll hand it over to you to go ahead.
Thank you, Gitanjali, and thank you, Seva, and the Indian Students Association. So I'll start off with just talking about mental illness and mental health and all the cultural factors that tie into it. But I'll start with my sort of my journey in terms of understanding, like, so I'm a psychotherapist, and we don't have very many South Asian psychotherapists. And as I continue talking, you'll notice, like, one of the factors what makes a barrier to seeking mental health therapy is also not seeing representation in the mental health field of South Asian mental health professionals, which also sort of like ties in with what professions are prized and what are not by our parents. So you'll find many, a lot of representation with doctors and engineers, but you barely see any with mental health. So with that, I want to say, like, the Asian American population, South Asian American specifically, has grown tremendously in the last 15 years. It's almost like doubled, and it's only going to grow. And so it's really important that we pay attention to the needs of this population. And so when we think of mental health, what comes to mind is, when I would talk to my clients, like South Asian clients, some of them would say, like, yeah, feeling good emotionally and sort of like just being able to hang out and have a good time and not worry. Those are some ideas and thoughts about mental health, which is, certainly in the ballpark area of what positive mental health looks like. But then when you talk about, if you were to talk about specific like psychotherapy and mental health, I've noticed, like, some of them would say, like, well, it's a mental problem, from the, it's an illness or sickness or it's weakness. So there's also that point of view, held within the community. So when we think of, like, mental health, what is mental health? So, like, I'll just reference, like, the American Psychiatric Association. So they tend to classify or describe mental illness as like a health condition. So it's important to know they consider it as a health condition. which involves like changes in your thinking, so cognition, emotions, and behavior. And so you're not the same sort of person, or you don't feel like the same person you were. And how we really understand, like, is that change problematic or not? And how we ascertain problem is it impacting our social life? Is it impacting our work, school? Is it impacting our family, interpersonal relationships? So if all of these start to get affected, one or more of these areas start to get affected, then we know we have a problem we need to look at. I remember, like, in graduate school, I was reading the diagnostic manual, and as I went through all the different criterias like anxiety, depression, I'm like, geez, I have all of these. I have all of these. And I'm like, in my mind, I thought, like, I must be really mentally ill. and, and then until I sort of read their formal definition, which says, like, we all feel the blues at times. We all feel anxiety from time to time. However, if that anxiety or that sort of like feeling the blues or low mood isn't really impacting your day-to-day functioning, then you're more or less okay. You don't need, you don't sort of fall under that formal mental illness category. But if you notice, like, things are off and it's impacting all of these, or one or more of these areas of functioning, then it's time to take a look at like what's happening. I mean, I don't like the word mental illness because it's sort of stigmatizing, like there's something wrong with you. And it's a very Western sort of, in the West, they try to like chop up everything and put it into little boxes. Yeah. So people can pick and choose. So I would say, like, it's just a condition where, which basically is indicating that there is something off, and then you need to take a look. That's all there is to that. So within the South Asian context, what are some factors that lead to, let's say, mental illness? Just to use that word for, so that it's easy. I've noticed like acculturation stress and intergenerational conflict. So acculturation stress comes from, like, a lot of the folks I work with or I have talked to are first generation students. And so their parents came from India or South Asia. And so with them, they bring the culture with, and they don't, so like if you ask, a lot of people, like, okay, why did you come to America? Many of them will say to make money, so or and so they end up sort of just making money, and there's little or no attention paid to, like, how do we as parents or as individuals, who have moved here, take care of adjusting, adapting to the culture. So that doesn't happen. And so what you notice is then, how do they survive then? They sort of form pockets within their own communities. So the Bangla folks will be hanging with the Bangla folks, and the Telugu folks will be hanging with the Telugu folks. And so they create their mini India, within their communities, wherever they're living. And so that culture just continues on, even though you're in the US. And so what the downside of that happens is, uh, the kids end up living in a dual culture, because they were, either they don't live in India, and so now they're living at home, and the parents are inculcating or, asking stuff off of them that is more culturally informed from when they grew up. And then as they step out there, it's a whole different world. So that navigating between these two worlds becomes really difficult or challenging. So an example is parents asking for unquestioned obedience, like, because I say so, you need to do this. And that can lead to resentment, and long-term resentment can lead to like internal conflict, which can then result in, feeling more depressed, feeling low, feeling down, feeling like nobody hears me or nobody cares. So that's one. So the dual identity piece, how do you navigate that? Uh, Followed by that is academic pressure from parents. So again, the expectation of like what success looks like, rather than considering, what the child's feeling is, what do they want to do. So success frequently is, anything that earns, any job that's esteemed, that earns good money, that's success. And as a result, parents are grooming their kids to go to Ivy League schools, for example, or or sort of. Uh, I had a South Asian kid in high school who I was seeing, and she just didn't have any time for anything because her parents had put her into like all the AP classes. Then she was doing band and then drama and then tennis. And at the end of the day, she was tired. And then the parents would complain, well, you don't spend time with us, for example. So there's a lot, and she had anxiety because her other Indian friends were planning on, applying to XYZ sort of like well-known Ivy League schools and preparing for like how to build that perfect resume, how to get that really good GPA. So in the process, nobody really cared about what that child really wanted. Here's a standard set for you, and this is what you have to achieve, and this is what's rewarded. And if you don't achieve this, then there is displeasure, dislike expressed, and that sort of gets to people, like for kids especially. Like that can lead to frequent anxiety, like as one of the persons I was working with would say, fear of missing out. If I don't take this AP class, I fear like my other classmates might take it and they'll get a better GPA or it'll look better on their resume and I might not. So that fear, what if. Another person had intense anxiety because he did not want to do these things, but his parents pressured him to do it. And he didn't really understand that this was anxiety. And the anxiety was so bad that he would get nauseous. Um, so that plays. Frequently, there is comparison by parents. Like, look at so and so. Like, if he can get this much, why can't you? Next time, you can do better. Things like that. So disappointment if you don't get like the desired results. So those kind of things. Then there is relationship stress, which is, you're expected to follow traditional norms of not dating. And I don't know how many have seen like Indian matchmaking, that TV show, but it's more of that arranged marriage kind of a phenomena that's sort of approved. So you're not expected to have a girlfriend or boyfriend, things like that. You're expected to, let's say, meet in each other's homes or something like that. So more traditional, while the world that you're experiencing does not operate that way. And so now you have pressure, like, okay, I want to be with this person. I want to explore this area of my life, like relationship, sexuality, but I'm not able to. And frequently people feel guilty and they may then lie to their parents, like that they have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, things like that, because they don't want to be caught and bring shame to family or be reprimanded for doing something that they shouldn't be doing according to their parents. So that piece. So essentially, and there is also lack of guidance from parents, like how to navigate relationships in this world of relationships, as uh, as people age into like teenage years and then go into college as well. So there is no template set for that. There is no discussions that's helpful, done around that. And so that sort of leaves a big gap. There is financial stressors too. Like sometimes not everybody who's South Asian is rich. Sometimes you have divorces and kids end up being with one parent or the other. And then there is financial stressors. So if you're over 16, the person ends up, wanting to support the family, things like that. And then there is divorce is also not uncommon. So that can be stressful, both financially and emotionally. Then there is mental illness in the family, which is frequently like kept under the rugs. Nobody talks about mental illness. So if a parent has undiagnosed or diagnosed mental illness, what that means is that then they are not really available emotionally to support the child. So they're physically there, but not really emotionally present to provide that good enough parenting, as we say. And so that then impacts the child's development, whether they're, and and so that then ends up sort of moving into their life developmentally. So they could be 16, 17, 20, 21. The impact of that unavailability is felt, for a long time until they have experiences, through therapy or otherwise, which help repair that. There's also, using drugs and alcohol that can happen where the most common sort of like substances are like alcohol and marijuana. So frequently, the people I work with, younger folks, use marijuana. Smoking has taken a different meaning. When I was in school, smoking meant cigarettes, and now if you say do you smoke, it means marijuana. So frequently, that's used to like cope with the day-to-day stressors. If parents don't understand you, all the stress, relationship stress from like having to perform, marijuana is a great, sort of like is a substance that brings about relief. So there's frequently we see that. Marijuana can also be used, or drug or alcohol is also used as a means to rebel. Like I don't want to, f this shit, and I don't want to follow anybody's rule, and I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. It can be a form of rebellion, and also at a certain age, teenage to emerging adulthood, there's this sort of feeling of invincibility. So that helps in also sort of like using. So those are some common factors that sort of shape up or drive a person towards having what I described earlier as mental illness. And so there are also certain barriers to accessing mental health. One of those I mentioned earlier is lack of representation of South Asian mental health professionals in the field. The second is it's a cultural thing where a lot of folks do not accept like Western medicine. They don't want to go to a psychiatrist and take medication because of side effects or what it might do to you. The other is stigma. You really don't want to. The idea of mental illness, I think in the South Asian culture, it's very much like you're crazy, basically. It's like the image I have is like you're just running on the street naked with your shirt ripped open. That's sort of like it can get to. And so a lot of people have this idea. The moment you use mental illness, it equals to being crazy or being nuts, and nobody wants to accept that my child or I am nuts. And so that idea of mental illness is rejected, and other ideas are floated. You've got everything. Why do why are you depressed? Or just go hang out with your friends, and here's some money, go to the mall, buy yourself something, and you'll be fine. So it's minimized. And that also curtails the ability for parents to really take that seriously. And so the urgency is not felt, and therefore the child or does not sort of like get easy or quick access to mental health, resources for mental health. Because when you're under 18, for example, you need parental permission. And because mental health and mental illness have not ever been talked about, within the family so much, now you're in college, and you 2 years ago you were a teenager, and maybe you still are. And so even though the age has changed, but the information you carry is still the same. Like you're not aware there, and I don't know how much, like in universities and the curriculum, they talk about, they talk about educating, or they provide education on mental health and resources, how nicely that is done. And so that can end up leading that person to just sort of still be clueless about what do I need, being in touch with their feelings, not really sure. Um, and then the programming, the cultural programming wherein mental health, because our programming happens because of not only stuff we directly learn, but also what we observe. So if you grow up in a culture or in a family where mental health is never talked about, or if you've heard or noticed, like, disparaging statements being made about somebody who was depressed in the family, or you notice like treatment of anybody who's mentally ill as negative, what's the message you're getting? Mental illness is not good, it's, or it needs to be pushed under the rug. That can be me. And so that programming also prevents the person from exploring options until, something happens along the way which helps them sort of realize what's happening, and then they seek help. I think I'm just looking at my points now to see if there's anything I missed.
We can transition
Uh,
into the Q&A, Nikhil, and then if you think of
yeah.
other things, we can
Okay.
prompt them with
Sure.
those questions.
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah, I think I was done. Yeah.
Perfect. Sounds good. So Nikhil, you talked a lot about kind of conflict within households and stuff. So similar to that, Janani, actually, we have a question for you. How do you handle dealing with like a toxic household, or necessarily their mentality towards mental health or toxic culture in general?
So, like, how do I personally handle if my parents, for example, had a toxic culture? So I think it's harder when you're younger. I think when there's a lot of, with that question, I'm assuming that there's going to be a little bit of age to this. So when I was 15, 16 years old, I was that typical rebellious kid who would do everything in spite of my parents. And I would always want to hang out with my friends or always want to go out. I got that criticism, oh, you're not spending time with me. And that guilt, like Nikhil mentioned, was manifesting so much in so many different directions that I continuously would rebel. And as I got older, I realized, again, this also comes down to introspection. Like, you also have to understand what you need as a friendship, as what you need as your parents, what you need from others in order to sit here and say that this person is toxic, correct? So I found it very useful for me to figure out, okay, what are my expectations that I have for my parents? Do I expect them to be there at my beck and call when I'm having an anxiety attack, or would I rather rely on friends for that? I think that was something that helped me figure out that compartmentalization. But toxic parents, that's a rough thing to go through. And to the person who asked that, I'm very sorry that that's something that is happening, because it's very rough to feel like you can't turn to your parents for help. But what I have seen and what I have done in the past is I sat them down on a day that we weren't fighting. And I said, this is the situation that is going on in my head. I'm feeling very pulled in so many different directions. Like, I want something, my friends expect something of me, and you're expecting something of me, and none of those align. And I think that consistent dissonance in my mind made me even more and more anxious and even more depressed, that I haven't dealt with it until this year. And why should a child go through so many years of school only to find at the end of their college experience they're now happy? There has to be some sort of correlation. And I think for me, moving out helped. I was able to exactly help tell my parents when I wanted to speak to them about certain matters, rather than them breathing down my neck. And there is no one answer, is basically what I'm trying to say. You have to understand what you need. You have to figure out what you want from the people around you and actively communicate that, because though it is tough to have that communication, and yes, there will be fights, It's better to put your foot in the door than to let it manifest and sit in and you're just going to be sweltering in all of this anger. So definitely communicate with your parents, because I guarantee eventually you guys will come to some common ground.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. That's a very good strategy, I would say, because communication, unless we have communication, we are not going to let the other person know what we are feeling and what we expect from them. Once you set those expectations, it's easier to share that this is what I expect, or at least I hope that you would do, or I would do for you. So that sets the boundaries and helps the relationships in a much, much better way. Thank you for sharing that. Nikhil, I have a question for you, and it's around
Sure.
parenting. Uh, so just like we are talking about the toxic parenting, there is a question around parenting. I believe it's a parent asking, is maladaptive perfectionism common with Indian parenting? I feel I have such high expectations for myself and an overwhelming fear of failure, of not being good enough. How can I start to cope with this?
Mm-hmm. So this is a more deeper answer to that. Like what I've heard, whenever people say I don't feel good enough or I fear I'll not be good enough, frequently if they examine their own sort of like development in their childhood, they would notice that they've had experiences that have developed that belief in them, in them, and unless those beliefs, so I'm saying like, okay, get therapy in other words, but uh, but whatever experiences created that belief will continue to stay until they really get in touch with it and try to sort of change that. Otherwise, they'll continuously try to, they'll feel that I've fallen short, or this is not good enough, I need to do even more. So there is this element of intergenerational um, stuff that's happening here. And the deeper, longer answer is, or long-term solution is to, for them to seek help, to be able to sort of really look at where that's coming from and address that. Because I can tell you, like, having worked with people like who carry these beliefs, and a lot of us carry beliefs, right? Everybody carries some belief, whether I choose to use the elevator or the staircase. If I believe using the staircase is like good for my health, I'll just do that. So it's belief based. So we carry all kinds of beliefs. So we're trying to look at what dysfunctional belief that is existing and where does it come from, and really tackle that. So that's one. So that's their individual work. The other work is, what I say is like self-compassion. If, so this is something that's really helpful for everyone. If you go to like self-compassion.org. So Kristen Neff, she's a clinical psychologist and a professor at UT Austin. And so she's done a lot of work on self-compassion. And so having self-compassion for self and therefore for others will really help sort of like minimize that perfectionism or feeling like you're not good enough, therefore you need to do more. And with everything I say, like, first step is awareness. If I'm not aware what's happening, I really can't do anything. So let me be aware of, where this thing is coming from, when it shows up, how do I invite self-compassion to address that so that it does, so I can limit its influence on other people, including myself. So that's sort of like the long, short answer. A lot of the questions like that will not have like a simple answer, like, making aloo gobi or something like that, where you do X, Y, Z, and things are great. So yeah, so it's more, it all goes down to self-awareness and addressing the issues that have created that sort of belief in the first place.
Yeah,
And
that's very correct. Yeah.
and I can tell you that these things can be tackled easily. It's not impossible.
Yeah, thank you for giving that hope too, because it's really important for the community to hear that mental health is not a very big issue. If you try to deal with it, you do have answers for that. Thank you so much, Kirat. Go ahead with the next question.
So Janani, this is a question for you. What do you do, or what should they do if you don't have access to therapy?
So I didn't have access to therapy for a very long time. So what I did was for a very, so when I was, I'll say a little story. When I was 15 years old, this is again where the trigger warning might be helpful. I was doing a lot of like self-harm, and I was very, very depressed, and I was also anorexic. So in that time, I was kind of calling for like crying out for help basically from my parents. And my mom was, we had a weekly weigh in because again, I was anorexic, and she saw a bunch of scars on my arms, and she took me to therapy. She sat in that therapy session, that first session, and then came out of it and said, "You're never going back there again." And I was at that moment had a very, I had no sense of self in that moment either. And I was struggling with that because of like bullying in the community. And then on top of that, now I had no faith in therapy because my mom, who I'm a very, it's in my formative years. I do what my mom told me to do, especially when it came to that. And so I didn't have access to therapy until pretty much now. And I think what I have done over the years is I've learned that I need to become more and more comfortable within myself to find those answers. And like I mentioned before, I have a lot of problems with loneliness versus alone. And I tend to put myself in a very self-isolating space. But sometimes that helps me in order to figure out exactly what I need in that moment. And if you don't have access to therapy, see if there's any sort of solution in terms of finding one online. I know that in terms of I know virtual therapy is something that can happen, but if it's a matter of health insurance, or it's a matter of anything that you have to be on your parents' bill, I definitely think talking to friends and family can be really helpful. Maybe communicating as to why you need that therapy to your parents might be helpful as well. And saying, and that again, that's a conversation that starts early. I personally wouldn't go to my parents and be like, "I need therapy." I think it would be, "I have these issues, I'm having these problems. I looked online and I was able to find that therapy was something that could help with this. Is this a possibility for me?" I think walking your parents step by step and kind of allowing them to understand you is what helped me. And it took me many years for my parents, my mom, who's a doctor, to even understand that therapy was something that was useful. So try not to put pressure on yourself to find all the answers in one day. Give yourself some space to breathe, and allow yourself to be comfortable to formulate your thoughts in terms of how you're feeling, what you're feeling. And then when eventually you do get to go to therapy, you can convey that to them too. So no time is lost. You're going to be okay. It's just a matter of, being patient with the process. And I know that's frustrating, but I promise you can get there.
So Kirat, I can add one more thing. There are certain resources out there. You can access the walk-in counseling clinic, which is on 24th in Chicago and Minneapolis. Right now, they're all online. So anybody can seek therapy. It's short-term, 10 sessions, but it's not hard and fast that you can only get 10, unlike Boynton. So they can just, and it's first come, first serve. They don't need insurance, any of that. It's free of cost. All they need is the name and which county you live in, and that's that. So people can, and then you can go whenever, as many times as you need to in a week. And because I've worked there for a little bit, so they're an excellent organization. So, people can feel free to approach the walk-in clinic for no strings attached sort of therapy. So that's one. And then NAMI Minnesota has, so if you're under 18, they have groups for younger folks. So they can go on NAMI Minnesota's website, and under support, they can look for the different support groups that are available, and these are free of cost. So nobody has to pay anything. So that's another place. And as Janani said, reaching out to people in your own network to seek support. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil, and thank you, Janani. So this next question is for you, Nikhil. Why is it so difficult for the older generation to understand mental health struggles? So this is something that we all have seen, and we have been talking about it to the
Yeah.
youth. So a very important question.
Yeah. Because I mean, as I mentioned before, like the idea, the word mental health is a Western sort of concept. It never exists outside of the Western hemisphere. So it's so therefore, and people who come from India, they grew up in a culture where mental health one was never talked about because it didn't really exist. And even now, like when I'm thinking of my own training, everything we read in mental health came directly from the West. There was no Indian mental health as such, right? And so that's one of the reasons why people are not when people are not groomed in a culture where mental health is talked about, then the idea of mental health doesn't exist. That's one. And the second thing is, like in India we have in collectivistic cultures, people, their mental health is sort of like not resolved, but addressed through like socializing, through with their neighbors, their families or friends, and it's sort of like there is that support available, which isn't so available in Western culture, in a Western culture, which is very individualistic. So there's the idea of nuclear family, and so when people move from India to the US or anywhere in North America, then they don't have that support that they used to have back in India to at least deal with some of those stresses of day-to-day life. And now and same time, uh, with the absence of like growing up in a culture where mental health and all of that is discussed, they don't know what to do very much. And and with the cultural thing about that I had mentioned earlier, like mental health is thought of like you're nuts or crazy, the idea of mental health is rejected. So some of those factors come into play in terms of why they don't get it. So I think we need to work on the stigma piece first, like and letting them know. I used to work with Somali immigrants, and if I were to ever use the word psychological or mental, they would be like, we have no issues, we're fine. you know then so then I had to approach it by saying, like, what are some of your concerns, right? What do you worry about? And so I did not use the word mental health or psychological issues. So we need to find ways to get to the root without using some of these Western ideas and concepts, because they are paired with, being crazy. So if we can develop strategies to use different language to get to the same place, that might be helpful.
Sure, definitely that would help a lot. Definitely, we have to kind of, like you mentioned, the Western concept of individualization is very strong, and we come from a culture that is community oriented, and we have always been going to our elders with our problems, which we do not have here. And going to a therapist who is also not culturally specific and explaining them your culture also becomes a hassle in itself, I think. So we are glad that we have people like you in the community to help us out when we need that kind of a therapy or that kind of mental health support. Thank you so much for that. Uh, Kirat, would you like to go for the next question?
Yeah, Janani, another question for you. What do you do when you keep going back to people who've hurt you in the past? So you can even just talk about that, and maybe a little bit about like toxic relationships and open communication.
Yeah, sure. So, what do you do when you keep going back to people? That's a really good question. I think in college, it's really easy to get roped into the same circle. In high school, too, especially when you all want Indian friends. I have that same thing where I seek other Indian people to become friends with, but then not all of them are going to be your friend, and it's easy to get roped back. I think for me, the way that I did it is it was a lot of trial and error, to be honest with you. And it took me a very long time to figure out who was a toxic friend and who wasn't. And I'm someone who is I think you can tell, but with the way that I speak, a very sensitive individual when it comes to like a lot of other happiness or sadness. I'm very prone to changing with my environment. And so with that, I've learned that certain triggers would constantly be triggered when I was at parties or when I was socializing with the brown community. And I had to shut it off. It took me literally be getting pulled out of college because of COVID to realize who my friends were and who weren't. And so in order for you not to learn through the hard way, I would suggest focusing on how does that person make you feel? Do you have a positive interaction or positive feeling when you see that person's name on your phone? How do you feel after leaving that conversation with them? And if it's always negative, then I would consider, slowly spacing yourself out. And I totally understand that if you're in a brown group, it's very hard because everything is so intertwined. So I think it's good that you're recognizing that you consistently go back to the same friend, because that awareness is key. But try your best to step away from that toxic group of people, because it can become a downward cycle of just constant negativity. And then you'll end up feeling, for me, I felt very much more alone than I was in the beginning with all those toxic friends. And then transitioning to the toxic relationship, I was in a relationship for 2 years, and this man was very physically abusive and emotionally involved, and very mentally abusive. And I would consistently go back to him because I thought that he was the one who was tearing me down. So I was going to do everything in my power to prove that I was worth it to the person who was tearing me down. And that kind of happens all the time in these toxic abusive relationships. And so it took me a very long time to get out of that. And friends always told me, you have to get out. My parents, my mom knew about the relationship from the get-go. My parents are very involved in that part of my life. And I told them, they saw how unhappy I was, and they were like, you need to leave this relationship. I think this person is really hurting you. And even then it didn't struck me that this was wrong. I think that unfortunately, this is another thing that comes within ourselves. Are we going to sit here and be treated in a way that's negative all the time? Or are we going to be able to be our own friend? And that's something that I struggle with even today. So I think for me, I go back to this all the time. It's introspection and it's open communication. It's sitting there and saying, okay, I want this for my life. This is how I foresee the next few years. Does this person or does this group of people align with that? And if the answer is no, then I need to either address the issue and confront them by saying, this thing is hurting me, or you are hurting me by doing this, and this. See what the reaction is. And if they come back with saying, I'm sorry, or they're willing to have some sort of discussion with you in order to improve the situation, then you can see if change occurs after that. But if they're not receptive of your needs or how you want to deal with it, then I would suggest pushing them aside, because clearly, your mental state is not much of a priority for that friend, and they should care about that. So I hope that answered your question with the open communication.
Thank you so much, Janani. Nikhil, you have something to say about this?
I mean, I agree with Janani. I think what stands out is one awareness, like what's happening to me and what do I need? And do these, so again, of course if you're doing therapy, that's great, so that you're addressing some of those issues that, that each one of us needs to address. And also keeping away people who don't, fit into your life right now. So it's not, so the word I use is self-preserving versus selfish. Sometimes people feel like I'm so selfish, like, I don't want this person help me, but I'm not, like, now I want them out of my life. But so think of the word self-preserving. Today I was talking to a 10-year-old, and the advice, he doesn't want to give up his friends, because even though they're mean to him, because then he wouldn't have any friends. So I'm like, okay, I'm like, friend, we talked about, like, friendship is like, friends don't do mean things to each other. So all you need to say is, when you do ABC, it hurts my feelings. Can you please not do that?
I just wanted to add on. I think that especially with toxic relationships, it's very hard to accept that your girlfriend or boyfriend would hurt you. And I think that intentionality, whether it's there or not, oh, he didn't mean to, or, it's not like he wanted to hurt me. Okay, but the impact was still there. So I think what I did was I measured intentionality with impact. And I said, is what you're hurting me like this much, and your intention maybe it wasn't to be that mean, but you were. And I think if you can sit there and address that with that person, that's number one. But with my ex-boyfriend, who I could not have a conversation with to address some of these issues, I should have been able to walk out, 6 months into the relationship. I personally don't know why I went and gave him the benefit of the doubt for 2 years. That's not selfless. That's not something that I'm doing to better the world. You don't have to give the benefit of the doubt if someone is consistently pushing you down. And that's when domestic violence occurs over and over again. And I did not want to be an example for my future children one day saying that this kind of behavior is okay. And so I think whatever it is, although it's hard to say it, it's that self-preservation, it's that self-dignity and a little bit of respect for my being and knowing that no one is allowed to hurt me.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you for sharing that. I remember one thing, I saw a clip of Oprah Winfrey talking somewhere, and she was talking to the person, and she said that it's not selfish. Self-care is not selfish. It's self-full. Whatever in the cup is mine, whatever overflows is yours. So we have to keep our cup filled. So you both have very effectively talked about that. Thank you so much. Nikhil, I have one question for you. How effectively does medication treat common mental illnesses like anxiety and depression?
I mean, medication doesn't really treat, like there are certain illnesses like schizophrenia, for example, where people are, experiencing psychosis, like they're seeing things that don't exist or hearing things that other people can't hear. In those cases, like medication helps like prevent those psychotic symptoms. In bipolar disorder, for example, medications help in reducing that movement between the two poles, depression and mania. So it reduces that fluctuation, that movement. But in the case of anxiety and depression and whatnot, those are the most common ones. I mean, medications help create sort of like that fertile ground so that you feel a little better, that you're in a position to help yourself, but they in themselves don't change. Like if you have a faulty thinking, a thought pattern, like, where you blame yourself for everything, medications are not going to change that. But they'll create this place for you where you can work on those things more effectively. So, the best clinical practice is to have both medication and psychotherapy. So normally what happens is people start with therapy, and if they feel like, well, things haven't like improved at a certain amount of time, adding medication so that, there's a double boost. And then that can help sort of the person get out. So what I want to say is also like, not, the medical model tends to, and there's also capitalism, right? If people, the more people are sick, the more medications and the more money pharmaceuticals make. So we want to make sure, like, to take medications with caution in terms of, okay, I'm going to take these for as long as I need while I work on myself. And when I start to feel, better, I can talk to my provider and see if I can start tapering off of those. Because, I don't want to use a crutch for the rest of my life. I just want to use it as long as, and when I'm able to walk, I don't need it. So being mindful of that, because a lot of providers don't talk about tapering. They'll talk
Yeah.
about, changing meds and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is one important thing that I wanted to hear. And it's really, really important to understand that medication is not a lifelong thing. Like you mentioned, it can taper off, and we can get rid of it over the period of time, the moment we start feeling better. So thank you so much, Nikhil, and thank you so much, Janani. This has been a really, really wonderful conversation. And I apologize to those who have not got their questions answered. We would be sending an email with Nikhil's and Janani's information, and if they have more follow-up questions, they would be getting a chance to get them answered. Kirat, would you like to say something before we all go?
Yeah, thank you so much to you guys. You took out the time to be a part of this extremely important conversation that we have been neglecting to have in our community. And thank you so much, Nikhil and Janani, for being a part of this event. Your voices are heard, and thank you for being resources for so many people that need it. Just a couple of announcements to wrap up from ISA. Make sure you're keeping an eye on our website and social media. Same with Seva for upcoming events. For ISA, we have a virtual booth at the Asian Student Association Union's Light Up the Night event tomorrow. We have a follow-up mental health discussion in which if you have questions that were unanswered that you would like to pose to your peers or to the group, we will have an opportunity to talk about those things over there. Fall show, Sangam is coming up in November. You can view more updates on the ISA website at www.isaumn.org. Please keep seva-aifw.org also in mind. They have events like these where we talk about mental health and intergenerational struggles, and they have a lot of support groups for specific populations. So make sure you keep that in mind as well. If you would like to be a part of our Humans of ISA initiative through Indian Student Association, we will send out the interest form in your follow-up email along with Nikhil and Janani's contact information, if that's okay. Once again, thank you so much for attending this conversation. We hope that it opened both the parent generation and the kid generation perspectives a little bit more than they were.
And I have a quick announcement. Seva AIFW does have free and confidential consultation sessions that you can avail of. So please feel free to contact us at counseling@seva-aifw.org. And you can have these services free of cost. And these are also confidential. So that was just one thing that I wanted to share. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.